Hi there, I'm Tish.
I'm not Lily.
And I'm one half of Haunted Housewives. I'm here today with my daughter Wednesday, who's home from Nevermore, and I thought we could have a little conversation about haunted houses, horror, and art.
Perfect.
So, Wednesday has been away for a little over 3 years now, and spending time on the West Coast.
Yes. To give a little background, I study acting on the West Coast. Very different from where we currently are.
Pittsburgh area.
Pittsburgh.
So, you have been a fan of haunted houses for a long time.
Whole life.
Your whole life. Can you talk about some of the differences you've seen? You've been to haunted houses out west. You've been to haunted houses around here, Pennsylvania, Ohio region. Mm-hmm. Are there broad differences between the approaches?
Yes. So I would say as a whole, I mean, I've only been on the West Coast, again, for like 3 years, so I don't know every single thing that's on the West Coast. But I would say as a whole, you see a lot more theme park haunts. I'm sure everyone watching knows Halloween Horror Nights, Not Scary Farm, Six Flags Fright Fest. And I mean, I know Six Flags is all over the country, but what you see more of is a lot of these big theme park things. Like the Queen Mary has Dark Harbor. A lot of the Halloween events tend to be bigger, like carnival almost type things. Or you have interactive theater like 17th Door and the Schoolhouse. You're not seeing as many traditional haunted houses because, I mean, for the people watching, I'm sure you know, but if you don't, at Halloween Horror Nights, it is a bunch of separate houses. So they're each like 15 minutes long, and it's 15 minutes of total complete scares, and it's intense and it's super fun. But I would say there's not as much interaction with the actors because they got to get you through. Like, obviously they're jump scaring, they're gonna say stuff to you, but there's not really as much of like a back and forth like someplace, I don't know, like Scare House or Castle Blood. There's not as much of a connection, but there is a lot of attention to detail with the sets specifically because there are so many, you know, former horror set artists that work on these places, like Grizzly Garden up in Santa Clarita. That is about a 30-minute walkthrough, and it's completely done by all these industry people who used to work on horror movie sets, so they create the effects that they used to make in horror movies for the walkthrough, which I think is pretty cool, but I do miss some of, you know, like the interaction, the tasks, we're going, like some of the fun stuff that makes you connect to each character. But there is a really, really high attention to detail on the sets. And I'm not saying that isn't true over here, but there are some practical effects that can be accomplished that are pretty crazy.
Right. I think the budget for those places
budgets
are enormous.
Way higher. Way higher. I mean, specifically for Horror Nights, I mean, obviously it's Halloween Horror Nights. It's like, I know Not Scary is the first, but Halloween Horror Nights does have that name recognition. And, you know, when we went in 2021, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre house was a complete, accurate recreation of that house itself. And, you know, the Universal Monsters sets, they're able to accomplish, I know last year for Unmasked, they were able to do a lot of really, really cool stuff for The Invisible Man, for Hunchback of Notre Dame, for Jekyll and Hyde. There's just some... When we went through the Halloween house, there was this moment where you're walking through the hallway and it looks like there is a wall, because it's a wooden wall, and then it goes completely blank and Michael is just standing there, ready to get you. So there's some really cool technical effects that you get there. And it's more of like a party.
I think that's a fair assessment. I've only been to Halloween Horror Nights, so
I used to work at Six Flags during Fright Fest, so I was in the backstage of it all.
And how would you describe our regional approach to horror? Can you generalize to a regional approach to horror?
I mean, I don't know, because there's so many different haunts here, but I think there is a little bit more emphasis on storyline than the haunts over in LA. Because I think on the West Coast, at least to the ones I've been to, there is a bigger focus on wow factor. And, making the most visually appealing thing rather than focusing on storyline. Like, I've watched the walkthroughs of Horror Nights this year. It's pretty much all just wow factor, which I love. Like, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But depending on what you want, if you're going to haunts here like Castle Blood, shout out, there's going to be more of a storyline. There's going to be more of a connection to the actors. They're a little bit more personal because they aren't getting the crowds that, you get in LA.
Right. Someplace like Crawford, too.
Oh, I love Crawford. Yes, there's much more through line for the story, and you're able to follow, like when you're at the schoolhouse, you're able to follow her story, and you see what's going on, and you are able to kind of adapt that for yourself. Whereas like Horror Nights, Fright Fest, it's all just kind of like, yeah.
And I know you haven't been there, but I'm thinking of even some of the more technically oriented haunted houses around here, like Wells Township, is still highly interactive.
Exactly. That's just, with the amount of people that are, it's a global city. There's so many people in LA. When you're going to Fright Fest, Horror Nights, Scary Farm, Dark Harbor, you're getting thousands and thousands and thousands of people a night. You're not going to get as much interaction from those people. Really, what those places focus on are not the houses for the interaction, but the in-between areas. Like, I know specifically for Fright Fest, I was friends with a lot of the sliders and, like, the walk-around actors, and that's where you got a lot of the most interesting interactions.
I remember going through some of the scare zones at Halloween Horror Nights.
They're so good.
Highly interactive, really well cast.
Yes. Intense.
So I want to switch gears just a little bit.
Okay.
Because I know that you want to do horror films.
Yes.
And you also have been focusing a lot on classical theater in your studies.
Yes.
I'm paying the tuition for it, but what's the connection between those things?
Well, I think classical acting requires such like a wide breadth of different techniques, and so does horror. I talked a little bit about this with Lily, but in horror you have to be able to go to so many extremes, and classical acting, that's where you learn those extremes. You're not going to learn it from just like basic contemporary acting. I love contemporary, but classical acting, you do have to go a little bit farther because the stories are more extreme. Looking at classical plays, there's no way you can't call Macbeth a horror. That is a horror play. Titus Andronicus, absolutely a horror. There are so many Shakespeare. Richard III, I would say, is a horror. Honestly,
I would agree.
Hamlet could be a horror. There are so many classical plays that
starts with an appearance by a ghost.
Exactly.
Up on the parapet.
Exactly. Like, I think horror will always be connected to obviously classical Gothic literature, and a lot of your favorite horror actors that you know are going to be classically trained because they need to have the ability to go to those extremes, like Anthony Hopkins and
Robert Englund.
Like almost all of the Tobin Bell, all of these like bad guys, all of these villains, like 9 times out of 10, they're classically trained because they need to be able to go into those deep emotional states while also going to the extreme for like being terrifying. Like, I was in this show, Heracles, shout out Heracles, where I had to play basically a horror character, and
she was the goddess of madness.
Yes. And there's a point where I had to like flip on a dime, and without classical training, that's really hard to do because you have to go from this emotional state where she was a prisoner, she's been tortured, she's lost all senses of herself, and she's chained up, so she's no longer mad. But, you know, the second her madness gets released, it's like, steer clear, because it's going to be an explosion. So you have to know the extremes in classical acting to be able to perform the extremes in horror acting, in my opinion.
You would not get any argument from me. I've had conversations with people where I try to explain the legacy of horror. That
I mean, so much of it is based in classical. Like, you can't tell me that, you know, Dracula.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's classical.
Yeah. Looking at the play that you were in, it's, you know, a Greek tragedy. Oedipus.
Thousands and thousands of
Heracles
Oedipus is definitely a horror. You can't tell me that's not a horror.
Right. The expressions.
Oh, Oedipus.
Oh, Oedipus. No. Would that there had been dating apps back in the day.
Oh, he needed it. He really did.
So, did you have any particular inspirations for your character when you were playing Madness? What did you draw on?
I drew on Ramsay Bolton for When I Went Crazy. Definitely Nancy from The Craft.
I could see that.
Definitely Nancy from The Craft. I was like, once she's like, you know, it's not fair, it's not fair. Mm-hmm. I was thinking like Veruja Banks in my head. Mm-hmm. I can do this. Little bit of Jennifer Check in there because I gotta shout her out every single chance I get. I love her to death. I was inspired by The Mauritanian, but that's not horror. That's just sad. I'm trying to think of what else. I have my book upstairs that has all my notes, but what else?
I think one of the things that I saw in this performance, because you were essentially playing two different characters.
Yes.
You were playing this vulnerable prisoner, and you were...
Thomasin from The Witch.
Thomasin from The Witch. I saw some stuff from Us in there.
Oh, yeah, that was definitely a part of it.
Lupita Nyong'o. Yeah. I saw some of that, the duality between Red and, was it Adelaide?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think...
Good for me for remembering.
Good job. I think so much of, like, creating a good horror character is, like, where the focus is in your eyes. I mean, at my school, we have, like, a saying that we have to have news in the eyes always when we're doing our pieces. And I think so much of how you can tell a good horror performance is, like, can you see the story behind their eyes? And I had to kind of switch how I was seeing depending on which state I was in, because, you know, if I'm like a prisoner and I've been like basically shell shocked, because our version of this show was set in like roughly 1940s, and we're focusing on, you know, soldiers who have been, or like also like after World War I, after war, and we all kind of had to be in a state of like uncomfortability and shell shock, and then switching to like total destruction in your eyes. There has to be that change.
Yeah, the moment of you standing in the doorway to Heracles' house with the chains off was chilling.
I love that moment.
A classic horror moment.
I love that moment.
All right. As a horror fan.
Yes.
Favorite underrated.
Hell House LLC.
That was going to be your answer to any question.
Okay, then Carmichael Manor.
Why is that your
Also,
favorite?
LLC.
Your favorite underrated horror film?
Because, okay, not enough people know it, and it is terrifying. It is so complete. It was just voted like one of the most terrifying movies to ever be created. Because the beats per minute.
Yeah, somebody did a study where they followed people watching different horror films, and they recorded their heart rates, and they recorded,
Hell House LLC.
heart rates throughout the movie and heart rates during jump scares, and Hell House LLC ranked really highly. It was
It's terrifying.
like maybe 9, and it's a relatively low budget film.
But that's what I love about it. Because so many of the other films, no tea to them, have these huge budgets, and they have the ability to, like, manufacture these scares and manufacture these stories and go to Sony and go to Paramount and go to, oh, if I need advice from, like, this, that, and the other, like, let me just call up James Wan. Like, they have resources, whereas Hell House LLC, you can tell that, it is a lower budget horror movie, but it has some of the most spectacular horror acting that I have ever seen, because all of the scares come from the acting or just the way they're positioning the camera. I mean, this is why Blair Witch was so monumental to the horror world. We're seeing that again with Hell House LLC, because they are literally, like, just using camera angles and, like, a slight tilt to really just unnerve you, and it's effective.
Move that prop just a few degrees.
And it works. I mean, those clowns?
The clowns are terrifying. For me, the scariest moment is
I know
a
exactly.
piece of acting. The scariest moment in that film is a change of expression on an actress's face. And
it's so good.
I remember watching it the first time and getting chills because I realized something horrible had happened.
It is a spectacular, spectacular movie. And obviously, like, I grew up going to haunted houses. My mother is Tish. Like, haunted houses are very near and dear to me. So any horror movie about a haunted house I'm gonna like. But this is able to capture the essence of haunt people better than any horror movie I've ever seen.
I will say they felt familiar to me. The characters felt
yes, because it's this fun group of friends being like, oh, we're gonna make a haunted house. This is gonna be awesome. And then it's like, no, it's not.
It is not awesome if you haven't seen. Spoiler alert. Not awesome.
So good. You need to watch the whole series, because the latest installment, really good.
Very well done.
Really good. Might be, I say, the second most terrifying in the series.
Okay.
It was
I would
scary.
agree. I would agree on that. It's very good.
Terrifying. It's so good, though. Other underrated horror that I love, Blood Quantum.
Tell the people about Blood Quantum, because I do think that one doesn't get
It doesn't get enough
much
recognition.
attention.
So it's set in this world, zombie apocalypse, where the only people that can't get affected by the zombie apocalypse is the indigenous population. And shout out Cherokee Nation. I love anything that puts, an indigenous actor in a place of power over, the rest of the world. And it's so brilliant. The concepts, the characters, you really feel for them. And they're trying to create this civilization, but they have a bunch of these white people following behind them, kind of ruining everything. And they're like, we are able to live in this civilization perfectly fine. We're trying to help you. Where is the disconnect? What is going on?
Yeah.
It's so good.
I don't want it to sound like too intellectual, but it's like, it is a commentary on colonialism.
Yes.
On people moving in and taking over your society and spreading disease.
Mm-hmm. And the only people left are the actual tenants of the land.
And it is that, but it's also gory and
So
exciting and fun, and you care about the characters. You care
do.
about what happens
You
to them.
really do. What's
Yeah.
your favorite underrated horror?
Session 9. Session 9. I will tell people about Session 9 every day of my life. That
That's true.
is a phenomenal underrated horror film because it walks the line between psychological and supernatural horror. And it does something that my favorite horror films do, which it leaves you feeling devastated at the end.
Yeah.
There is a complete story, and when you realize what is happening,
Yeah.
it's devastating. And I like the horror films that linger. I like the stuff that makes me
The
really
stuff
think.
that sticks with you like in a month, not just like the day after.
Right.
You can't stop
Yeah.
thinking about it.
And for those of you who don't know, Session 9 is about a guy who runs an asbestos abatement company and is hired to tear all the asbestos out of this old, massive, insane asylum. And
So creepy.
to win the bid on the contract, he's promised to do it in some ridiculously short amount of time. So he's going without sleep. He's working with family members and friends and trying to push them and trying to convince them to keep pulling the asbestos out of this vast, creepy building. And they're discovering tapes from the patients who live there, who used to live there. And one series of tapes suggests that one of the patients was possessed. And as you watch the movie, you begin to suspect that there's something still in the asylum that is driving them. So, if you haven't seen it, Session 9,
So good.
Peter Mullen, who has done a bunch of other horror films, is fantastic in the lead role. It has some random bigger names in it, like David Caruso and Josh Lucas. They play some of the guys who are helping with the abatement. Great film, great setting. Check it out. Check out Blood Quantum.
Shudder.
Yeah,
It's on Shudder.
But all right. Any other advice to people for spooky season?
For spooky season, definitely go watch Hell House. Sorry.
And go to a haunted house.
Go to a haunted
hope
house.
that the clown statues aren't really alive.
Yes. Really
maybe.
hope that they won't move like that. Just randomly.
But thank you, Wednesday.
Of course.
Good having you home.
Good to be back for 4 days.
And we will be back with more recommendations on reasons to visit haunted houses and more conversations about horror. Bye.